Americans are ready for something new, something different, and something substantive as they continue to grapple with the condition of our republic. And as I watched that presidential debate, the first GOP presidential primary debate of the 2024 election season, all I could think of was that they were not getting any of that whatsoever, and that such a huge moment that is occurring in our culture and our nation right now is being missed by most of the people on that stage. After the debate happens, there's this sort of song and dance that happens in the media and happens in culture that so many people, myself included, get sucked up into. And it's always the following, it goes the following way. The debate happens, people make hot takes on Twitter, they make comments on Twitter that are just spur of the moment, that really don't have much thought behind them, that are just born of emotionalism, and then after that they try to assess the validity of certain candidates or the soundness of our political condition on the basis of these ill-formed ideas and beliefs. And a part and parcel to this foul process, which I'll explain why it's foul in a second, is the following question. Who won the debate? Or who had a good night? Now, some of you may be expecting me to go through each candidate one by one and explain who won the debate and who had the best night. I can't do that in good conscience. You know why? Because I don't believe any individual person won or lost in that debate the other night as the posting of this video. I think all Americans, especially all dedicated Americans with a mind, lost that debate. What do I mean? Presidential debates are not actually debates. They are glorified public speaking competitions that the corporate media has lifted up almost to a deific level. They have put presidential debates on the level of some kind of divine quality. They are sacred cows. They are norms and traditions that are expected to happen in the process of American politics, in the courtship process that happens before the primaries, which is when the prospect votes on the results of the courtship. Is when the voters tell you if you succeeded or not, and they are held to be this metric of a successful candidate or of a successful campaign. Indeed, presidential debates in the past, due to the media significance put into them, have literally sunk or propped up past presidential campaigns. You may remember when Donald Trump ran in 2016, his performances in the debate were so strong that a lot of people who might have previously not been into him realized how much of a warrior he was in those contexts, and that's one of the reasons he had his seismic rise. And Marco Rubio's campaign was completely derailed by Chris Christie back then, who made one or two jabs, which was enough to delegitimize him in the eyes of the American public. The fact that these single events, which are not debates, because debates are literally formalized processes of seeking the truth, of pursuing the truth, whereas these are merely blood sport power struggles meant to prop up one campaign above another on the basis of tribalistic nonsense. If these events have so much sway over the American mind, then I submit to you, the American mind is in danger, and it has lost. It can win nothing because it has bound itself to mediocre ideas. Let that sink in. You don't win by seeing a bunch of grown men and women scream and fuss like little children who don't have the faculty of reason developed. You don't win by getting canned, cliched, super PAC approved, consultant approved lines spoken to you as if you are a cat seeking catnip and not a fully functioning, rational human being. But we understand that a lot of politicians don't see you as a fully functioning, rational human being. They see you as a statistic, as a number, as a quantity that can get them towards where they want to go, their position of power, which is one of the reasons why DeSantis had that listless vessels moment. It's one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton had that back to the deplorables moment. They don't see you as human beings. And yet, this is what you are getting with these presidential debates. You are getting mediocrity and intellectual degradation, low-quality ideas fed to you on a silver platter, and you're expected to sit there like a bunch of clapping walruses and not rise up against it. You are expected to expect and accept mediocrity. And that shouldn't be so. So we're breaking the Overton window, and we are saying that no one wins in these damn debates. The American people lose, and I stand by my position. Having said that, See, happy Christian now. Having said that, there were moments in that debate last night that shocked me, and there are things that are worth talking about, because as I mentioned, this mediocre practice has such a big sway over the American mind. And it's my goal, hopefully, to divorce Fox debate, divorce fake debate from real debate. Real debate is good and valuable, and it nourishes you and gives you fruit. You don't get no fruit from these kind of activities that we saw the other night. But there were a few moments that are actually quite telling, and they offer some teaching moments to us as Americans. Let's go start with the first one that really stood out to me, and that is on the issue of national decline. So Mike Pence and Vivek Ramaswamy, who, by the way, I thought Vivek had a reasonably good night. Again, no one won the debate. Break yourself from that mind frame. No one wins these things because there's no really winning in mediocrity. There's no winning in irrationality. There's no winning in ignorance. There's only defeat. There's only temporal, superficial victories in these things, but eternal defeat. Would you rather win a temporary victory and have eternal defeat, or lose a temporary battle and have eternal victory? I know what I would do. Different story, different day. But the Vivek-Pence encounter on this issue kind of delineates and establishes just how differently the establishment views the state of America, as opposed to how people in the grassroots view America. Pence obviously has the establishment view. And I'll actually play the exchange here so you can actually see what happened.
For a new national identity. The American people are the most faith-filled, freedom-loving, idealistic, hardworking people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people.
Well, Mike, I think the difference is you might have, some others like you may have on the stage, it's Morning in America speech. It is not Morning in America. We live in a dark moment, and we have to confront the fact that we're in an internal, sort of cold cultural civil war.
And we have to recognize the American people with the failed government in Washington, D.C. We just need government as good as our people again.
So, let me just finish addressing that slogan, because I don't know what that slogan means. We need to shut down the administrative state. That's actually how we translate.
So you see, Pence says, America is not a nation in decline. How dare you say that? You're confusing the government with the American people. And then Vivek tries to say, no, that's not the case. Now, obviously, when you have these mediocre practices that only allow you 1 minute of speaking time and 30 seconds of rebuttal time, you can't really get out a substantive answer, which is one of the reasons why these are not debates. These are glorified public speaking spectacles, circuses meant to keep you complacent, meant to feed you false fruit, meant to literally make you have a drought in your mind that makes you desire this kind of stuff. They're not debates, but separate story, separate day. But we can see there that Pence is quite literally not even addressing the substance of what Vivek said, not even being attuned to the actual events happening in reality, because it doesn't even take a genius to look at what's happening in the American people's culture right now. You have an assault on womanhood that tries to say that it's not a biological category, it's instead a social construct. You have an assault on childhood innocence, this agenda undertaken by those who believe that all norms are oppressive and therefore we need to disrupt all norms. This is the agenda of the sort of queer ideology, the gender ideology that was birthed from the canals of the postmodern movement in the 70s and was reinforced and reinvigorated by Judith Butler and gender troubles in the 90s and was built upon by all of her acolytes that came in the academy. Academia is like this factory of destruction and chaos and corruption that so many Americans, so many well-meaning people believe is instead this factory of knowledge, when in all reality, it's the factory of anti-knowledge. We have to really reevaluate our relationship with academia as Americans. Different story, different day, as I mentioned. So if we look at anything seriously, if we look at the rise of Antifa thugs, other sort of chaos agents that are literally given impunity in the cities that are governed by ideologies that allow people, if it's under a certain price amount, to loot stores, smash and go, you can't look at America and say everything is all herky-dory when you have, as Oliver Anthony pointed out in his brilliant song, Richmond, North of Richmond, people quite literally profiting off endless destruction, profiting off the poverty, the impoverishment of the American people, and the sacrifice of their interests to the behest of the interests of people thousands of miles offshore. You can't say that America is in a good space. When you have a government that can spy on you and take your stuff, take your data without due process, without any accountability, you can't say America is in a good place, and yet none of those things matter to Mike Pence. Why not? Because Mike Pence speaks in archetypes. He speaks in cliches. This is another reason why Mike Pence said during the abortion section of the debate that America needs a moral leader. Now, during the abortion section, the question was, does the president have the right to impose a federal abortion ban on every state in America? If you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the 10th Amendment, and more broadly, if you believe in the principle of subsidiarity, which simply means that the most local government is the best government, there's no way on a political, constitutional, or moral or philosophical level you can say the federal government has the right to impose its view of the reality upon every other state that are self-governing local units as envisioned by the Constitution. So the answer is no, but instead of embracing that obvious fact, Pence begins invoking Jesus in the Bible. He begins using religion as a political tool. It's interesting. Politics is the science of power. It's the science of how power works in a particular setting and how to apply power in that particular setting. But when you are so close to this science of power, it is very hard not to get corrupted by its allure. And sometimes people will use politics as a means of efficiency, of furthering their biases and their worldview, without actually using politics confined by first principles, confined by first philosophy, confined by moral thinking. Pence using his religion to justify an otherwise unconstitutional and immoral proposition is an example of how power rots the mind and makes everything sacred mundane. The idea of Christ and religion is sacred, but he made that in that moment mundane by proposing it as a political proposition. This is the problem with theocracy. Theocrats make the idea of God mundane because they try to use the idea of God to have control over the minds and practices of people in the society. When if you believe in the Christian tradition, free will and freedom is at the center of man's relationship with the transcendent, which is why I don't believe in this post-liberal crap that we need to have a religious government oriented around communitarianism, oriented around the collective, because that will do nothing. You can't force people to be virtuous, Mike Pence. Anyway, so I found that really odd. He speaks in archetypes. He speaks in these broad concepts. He speaks in a way that escapes any substance, escapes any rigor. And the American people, many people, have been trained and groomed to accept that as valid and to argue within that framework. Ramaswamy, to his credit, refuses to argue within that framework. There's more instances as well. Nikki Haley, my lord. Nikki Haley, when the moderators asked everyone on that stage, what do you believe we should send more money to Ukraine? And Vivek and half-heartedly DeSantis, half-heartedly, were the only two to raise their hands. And Nikki Haley launched into this tirade about how Vivek supposedly does not support Israel, and therefore that is evil, and how Vivek supposedly sides on the side of Putin, as opposed to pro-America Ukraine. I just thought to myself, Haley uses all these different words, says America needs to be a moral leader, that's the language she used, a moral leader, and yet forgets the first principle of moral obligation when it relates to the nation, that the nation has an obligation first to its citizens and to no one else. And most importantly, within that obligation to its citizens, the nation has the obligation to maintain its sovereignty. The kind of proposals that Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Mike Pence said he wants the arsenal of democracy to be funneled through America. He said that literally. I'll play it right now.
We've been the leader of the free world and the arsenal of democracy for years. The Reagan Doctrine years ago made it clear. We said, if you're willing to fight the communists on your soil, we'll give you the means to fight them there so our troops don't have to fight them. Vivek, if we do the giveaway that you want to give to Putin to give him his land, it's not going to be too long before he rolls across a NATO border. And frankly, our men and women of our armed forces are going to have to go and fight him. I want to let the Ukrainians fight and drive Putin and the Russians back out into Russia.
I want to just briefly address Pence, Vice President Pence.
And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said, if Once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
The worldview represented by these kind of people, these neoconservatives, basically says America can and should be sacrificed to external interests. America could and should be sacrificed to liberal international hegemony birthed after World War II, propped up by groups like the Atlantic Council, the United Nations, NATO, and other interests that have a interest in America remaining a militant force in the world. America should sacrifice herself to those interests as opposed to looking at the very real interests of having here at home. And when you tell them that this is mutually exclusive, they say, no, it's not. America can also defend the homeland while also sacrificing itself to interests that erode the sovereignty of our nation. The two are mutually exclusive. Either you have a sovereign nation that cares about its people, that cares about its own independence, or you have a nation that is a serf to external forces, in which case you don't have a nation, you have a colony. Let me say that again, because some of you need to hear that. Either you have a nation that is sovereign and it cares about its own people, or you have a nation that is a serf to external interests. In that case, you don't have a nation, you have a colony. Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Chris Christie want America to be a colony of globalist interest, a colony of European powers. And any true American will understand a nation cannot exist in that way. This entire idea of the arsenal of democracy is complete and utter nonsense. Imported from the Bush era, derivative from the post-World War II liberal international order, the consensus that America has to be a force in the world and we got to stop communism, we got to stop fascism from arising, so let's go ahead and be open with our economic relationships, but let's force people to abide by our desires and to abide by our goals at the barrel of a gun. That's what American foreign policy has been for the past 70, 80 years. The neocons are just a derivative of that long-standing tradition. And it's a tradition that is hurting Americans. Over $1.2 trillion spent in between Afghanistan and Iraq, which was pursued under false pretenses. Forget weapons of mass destruction. How about the fact that during the early 2000s, right around when Iraq happened, there were a bunch of anthrax attacks that happened in America, anthrax attacks. And Robert Mueller, who was the FBI director at that time, was pressured by several people within the administrative state to blame the anthrax attacks on Iraq to make more of a justification to go to war. And people like John McCain went on late night TV saying, we believe the anthrax attacks came from Iraq. And that was used as a basis. That lie was used as a basis to go ahead and invade a sovereign country and set up a provisional government and spend millions upon billions nation building in this far off land that still remains mired in chaos and terrorism to this day. I'm 23. For as long as I have been alive, America has literally been doing this kind of regime change, this kind of arsenal of democracy exportation, which has led nothing more than the destruction of our standing in the global stage, the destruction of our dollar, because we have to, in order to fund these endless wars, we have to raise the debt ceiling, we have to devalue the currency, the nature of our currency. It has led to nothing more than the sort of lining of the pockets of the military-industrial complex. And the fact that you only had two people, one half-heartedly, but the other one entirely, Vivek, that said that we would not spend more billions of dollars on Ukraine just shows you how much Americans have lost in this debate, because literally the entire field, with the exception of Vivek and Trump, are bought and paid for by interests that have been, for my entire lifetime, selling us down the river and eroding our national sovereignty at the behest of wartime profiteering. And guess what? I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. It's despicable. And yet, I'm supposed to just sit here and say, oh, Christie had a bad night. Oh, Haley did this. Oh, Haley did that. No, people. I'm tired of the framework that you and I as Americans, you listen to me closely, are expected to live in and thinking when we confront political issues. I am tired because it is leading us nowhere. It is giving you no fruit. It is leaving you in a drought. It is leaving you ignorant and stupid. We have to be better than this, people. And so, before I close, because I gotta get out of here, before I blow a gasket. Another point I want to make is that Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, and Chris Christie, in their interaction with Vivek, they all talked over him several times. I'll even show you guys here. They talked over him. You can tell that they got very passionate. They were screaming. And Haley particularly screamed about the idea about foreign aid, about Vivek wanting to cut foreign aid to Israel, which I'll explain that in a second. And we should understand something. Be very careful, people. If you meet somebody that instead of actually letting you finish your points, instead of actually listening to your arguments, decides to, in a fit of fervor and vain emotionalism, gets carried away by blind passion and just talks over you and just spits a bunch of neocon or any kind of really ideological talking points, you should immediately discount every word they're saying, because that is propaganda, and you should proceed to scorn them and to scold them and to rebuke them for being a blind emissary of ideas that they themselves have not even sought out to be true or not. You should scorn them for being a useful agent of foul ideas that they themselves aren't even critically evaluating. I would have looked at Nikki Haley and said, hey, these ideas that you're shouting at me, that you're not even putting forth in syllogistic form, in correct form, you don't even understand those ideas. You don't even understand if these ideas are true. You are just an emissary, blind emissary for this stuff. If someone can't rebut your arguments after listening to you and considering the merits of them and the flaws of them, then they're not someone who has the temperament or the intellectual ability or the intellectual willingness to be a charitable soul. And if you can't be a charitable soul, you can't be a good leader. The number one principle of leadership is charitability, period. Because leadership is not about commanding people. It's about collaborating with people in a manner that brings them towards a particular end. But collaboration is not commanding. Collaboration is not authoritarianism. Collaboration is understanding. It's sharing values. It's listening. But evidently, some of these people on this stage couldn't do that very well. They were overtaken by their emotions. They were possessed by their emotions, so much so that they were blinded to reason. And that's another reason not to endorse the neocon establishment. Because they're mad, they're angry, they're furious that there is someone that dares to question the established wisdom, if you can even call it that, mockery of wisdom rather, that has destroyed the American standing and destroyed American sovereignty over the past 30, 40 plus years. They're insulted. On the topic of foreign aid to Israel, we should understand something. Regardless of what Vivek believes, let's talk about Christian Watson for a second. American foreign aid is one of the most deceptive commodities, I call it a commodity for a reason, that the American government has used for the past 40, 50, 60, 70 years to expand its geopolitical influence over the world under the pretenses of benevolence. That's why it is evil. First of all, as I mentioned, the first moral obligation of a nation is the obligation it has to its people, not to other nations. That alone disqualifies foreign aid. Well, Christian, if I send foreign aid to other countries, then won't that make us safe if those countries actually fight our enemies? Okay, what happens? See, here's the thing about the human will. The human will is so dynamic and unpredictable that what happens when you aid someone and they turn on you? This has happened several times. The CIA trained the Mujahideen tribes in Soviet Afghanistan, and they turned on us and became terrorists. The American government propped up Gaddafi. We propped up Hussein, gave them money. They turned on us and we killed both of them. I mean, the problem is you can't count on loyalty from people who believe that their first and primary interests, like Gaddafi and Hussein believed, is their obligation to their nations. So that entire argument, prima facie, just fails entirely. But also, the more money America gives certain countries, the more strings attached there are to that money, and therefore America now has a foothold in those countries. America is not supporting Israel because America likes Israel. America is supporting Israel because it is convenient for America to support Israel so that we have a foothold in one of the most profitable regions for our government. If you think America is supporting Israel because she's the bestest democracy in the Middle East, you're wrong. America is supporting Israel because it selfishly benefits us and allows us to do geopolitical wrangling with China, with Russia, with Syria, and other nations who we don't like for a variety of reasons that I don't have enough time to get into. That's what's going on. That's the truth, if you want to talk about the truth. So when Nikki Haley says, you want to cut foreign aid to our ally in Israel, what she's actually saying is, you want to limit the power of the liberal international world order hegemony, which has been the cause of so much destruction and so much immoral behavior, so many illicit coups around the world. And that makes me mad, because I think the world is better with America's guns pointing on their back. That's what she's saying. That's what the hell she's saying. If you want to get rid of all the fluff and all the anger and all the rage, that's what she's saying. I have nothing against Israel, by the way. I would cut all foreign aid to all nations because foreign aid is an inherently evil concept. The idea that you would sacrifice, you're already expropriating money from people in America, which is bad. Expropriation is horrible, immoral, it's theft. Then you're going to take that money, not even use it to their benefit, use it to benefit some other external forces. That is fundamentally evil. That is against national self-interest and against national sovereignty, no matter what way you cut it. And the fact that foreign aid is literally a smokescreen to increase U.S. political and military power in other countries is even worse because it furthers the hegemony, which does not care about the processes of our republic that go into governing foreign relationships. We haven't had to declare war since World War II. Think about that. Think about that and how many wars we've been in as Americans. That's my problem. So I will cut all foreign aid to all countries right now, forever. Just my opinion. My friends, we need a revolution of the mind in this country. Yes, I didn't cover the whole debate, but I think I got the essence of it. The essence is, nothing new was given, no fruit was given, and instead, the same establishment politicians that have been using the same lines for the past 12, 20, 30 years are using the same lines on you again, like you were a cat which is susceptible to catnip and instinct, as opposed to a spiritual being possessed with the faculty of reason. And they want you to think that their talking points, their substance-less ideas, their weak beliefs are enough to constitute meaningful dialogue and substantive solutions, and they are not. We need a revolution of the mind in this nation that studies philosophy, that studies first principles, studies history, and gets us back to a place where Americans, both Americans and average, both Americans, not average, regardless of who you are, understand what it means to have moral conviction, understands what it means to be an American, understands what it means to think soundly through things, understands what it means to critically and Socratically evaluate a proposition. Most Americans in the founding generation had a book in their house. They were literate. They understood things. They didn't always get everything right, but they understood things. We need a revolution of the mind that will get us back to that place of richness and nourishment and fruit, and away from this drought that is called contemporary politics. And that can only happen when we begin to reject these sacred cows, when we begin to reject what has been spoon-fed to us by the corporate media, by the establishment, by the Uniparty, by these people that think, that believe that this kind of spectacle is the sum of our politics. Politics is not, last point, politics is not supposed to be a game of conflict or a zero-sum game of conflict where one person loses and one person wins. Politics, bound by first principles, is merely the process of governance. And governance, bound by first principles, bound by natural law, bound by right ideas, should be limited and it should be focused. But instead, due to the activities of the progressives against us and the activities of so many even people on the right who have devolved from their proper thinking of government, politics has become a game of power, a game of tug of war, and a game of control and domination, not a game of limited, targeted governance. We have to change that. And to change that, we must have a revolution of the mind. My friends, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. If you want to help me financially, donate to me on Patreon, patreon.com, christianwatch.com, locals, PayPal, all that information will be in my comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please, 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 forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye all.